For those who seek adventure, this is the Buffalo Roamer Podcast, sharing the people, places, and moments that make a life on the loose worth living.
The thing that's going to stick out to you most is when they open up that plane door. The cold is something like you've never felt.
There's a huge blonde grizzly bear. And when it saw us, this thing put its head down, stomped on the ground, and hissed like an alligator.
The jungle's so thick. Even if you had a machete, you couldn't get through it.
I just crossed this brutal stretch of desert, and I was really suffering.
I'm your host, Will Collins, an adventurer, outdoorsman, and roamer of wild places. I've backpacked the Brooks Range, rafted the Grand Canyon, and canoed from source to sea, both the entire Mississippi and Yukon rivers. I live for adventure, travel, fresh air, and diving into the unknown. And now, I hope to share my passion with you on the Buffalo Roamer Podcast. All right, episode 44, Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Here we go. Thanks for tuning in. If you like the show, please leave a review or a 5-star rating on iTunes. That's Apple Podcast or Spotify. Either of those places will really help us out and help new people find the show. Or better yet, tell a friend about Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Okay, today's podcast, Mason Gravley is on the show. Mason is a podcaster himself, an outdoorsman. He is the host of the Adventure Sports Podcast and also another show called Without Compromise. Go check out both of those. And without further ado, Mason Gravley on Buffalo Roamer Outdoors. Mason, thanks for hopping on, man. Good to reconnect after doing one of these for your show, and then it'll be fun to flip the script a little bit. How you doing, man?
I'm doing really good. Great day. I got a fresh cup of coffee with me. I'm sitting in the passenger seat of my truck looking at the stars. It's not a bad night, and shoot, man. Yeah, I don't even know. By the time this comes out, not sure if your episode will be out, but if not, it was an awesome conversation. So people should go check that out, because I don't know how much you get to tell your stories on your own show.
Yeah, absolutely. Not much. So depending on,
Same.
like you said, depending on when the episode drops, absolutely go check out the Adventure Sports Podcast for that episode and all the other episodes. And I guess while we're on the topic, Mason, why don't you just give me a little bit, give me like a general rundown of Mason Gravley and your connection to the podcast world and the outdoors and adventure sports.
Oh, man. So, yeah, I host Adventure Sports Podcast. Host another show called Without Compromise through my day job at Athletic Brewing. But yeah, gosh, been hosting that show about 3.5 years. I was a guest on it, kind of like you were on my show. And I just became friends with the hosts. And I've told this story a few times, but I could tell they were could tell the one host that hosted me, Kurt. I was on the show a couple times over the course of a couple years for some adventures I had done. And I could just sense he was a little burned out. I could just tell in his voice. And I said, hey, man, if you ever need help hosting, let me know. And I didn't hear anything from him for probably a month. And I was like, oh, shoot, I hope it didn't make it awkward, kind of like when you tell somebody you like them, and it's like, well, that friendship's over if they don't like you back. So it was kind of like that. But then about a month later, I get an email from Kurt, and he says, man, he goes, hosting this show has caused Travis and I, and Travis was the other host. It was two guys, basically best friends, that started this show together back in 2015. And he said, hosting these show for like 3.5 years, about how long I've been hosting it, it's just caused us to want to live a different lifestyle. It made us both want to kind of take more adventurous paths. But if we do that, we can't host the show anymore because, it would be too in the air. And so we're kind of in a catch-22. Yeah, exactly. And I will say, hosting a show about adventure sports means that you don't always get to do them yourself, because you're editing episodes, you're talking to people. It's a lot of work. But so, yeah, they were both like, we kind of want to hand it off to somebody. And I was entering a stage of life where I had been married a couple years. We were thinking about a family, and I was like, I'm kind of entering a phase of life that's a little more consistent. So it kind of worked out. I took it over, and yeah, the rest is history. It's been awesome. 3.5 years. I've talked to incredible people like you. every week I get to talk to people. It's probably the highlight of my week to be able to hear these stories from around the world. And I'm serious. Like I'll go to the dinner table at night talking to my wife and like, you never believe who I talked to today. You never believe their story and the things they've gone through. And just literally out of the closet of my bedroom, it's not a walk-in closet. It's just like a door I open and, put a little thing around. It looks like a shower curtain. And it's like, it's amazing the amount of things you can capture in a little old space like that,
Yeah, absolutely,
so
man.
That was a lot. That was a lot.
And I feel the same way, and I'm excited to dive into. I want to pick your brain about, because your show, you've been around for long enough and have been consistent that you have so many, and it's frequent enough. You do 2 episodes a month or 2 episodes a week, and a lot of those are new ones that you talk to so many people and so many amazing adventurers and all different kinds of outdoor sports and pursuits that I'm looking forward to picking your brain about some of the memorable guests that you've had that come to mind. But first, I want to start with how you originally got tied into the Adventure Sports podcast at all. What was your background in adventure sports or long distance tripping or camping or any of that type stuff?
Oh man, good question. I grew up in the South, in the kind of the deep South in Florida. If you don't know, if you get away from the coast in Florida, especially, people don't realize it's pretty much like going to Georgia or Alabama. It's very rural, very southern, aside from like Orlando. But there's so much of it is rural agriculture, cattle. Literally, my mom sends me a picture today from her house of or a video of a cow across the street giving birth, like right there in her front yard. It's like it's very much rural cattle country and orange groves and stuff. So I grew up hunting and fishing and camping in that sense. And then as I got older, I tell this story a lot too. I was like, we weren't very good sportsmen, like hunting and fishing. We weren't very good at it. So we kind of came back empty-handed most of the time. And when I became an adult, or especially in college, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to stop doing that. I'm going to stop going out with the goal of shooting a deer or a turkey. I'm just going to go out for a walk. I enjoy that aspect of it, and not really knowing that was a big culture, hiking and backpacking and adventuring. But I started doing that a little bit more in college, and I had my best friend and I, Paul, we both played basketball in college together. And just small school. It's a small college in Central Florida, like NAIA. And so we kind of had the summers to ourselves. And I remember he was graduating, and I had a couple years left, and he wanted to do something really big to kind of celebrate. And his idea was like through hike the Appalachian Trail. And we're like, okay, how long does that take? And it's like, 4 or 5 months. We wouldn't be very fast at it. We're not super prepared. We would have probably done it on the slower side or medium, like middle ground, not super fast, not experts. We're like, even then we don't have enough. I wouldn't have enough time in the summer to do that. So the idea we eventually settled on after this kind of crazy story in our apartment, we were just looking at a world map, and we just literally decided right then, all right, 2 days, 3 days, whatever it is, just a few days after school gets out this May, we are going to fly one way to Fairbanks, Alaska, and we're going to ride bicycles all the way back home to Florida.
Oh, man.
And yeah, man. And so, you had we talked on my show about the Yukon trip. And so much of what you said was reminding me of my time kind of in those areas, but on the Alcan Highway. So much more developed, much more, ability to resupply and all that, not nearly as isolated in wilderness as your trip, but there was so many things I was like, I remember stuff like that too. But yeah, so we flew to Fairbanks 2 days after school got out. He graduated, like I said. I had a couple years left, and we had about probably 60, 70 days to get back, and that's just about how long it took us.
Awesome.
And I remember, it was a wild story. We knew nothing. So literally our winter clothes, because it's May
from Florida,
and from Florida in May it's 95 degrees outside, 100% humidity. It's terribly hot, And we were thinking it'd be the same. We were thinking, okay, we know it's going to be colder in Alaska, but we didn't know by how much. And I'll be honest, I don't understand if we just didn't do our research or what. But I remember thinking, it's probably going to be nice. And so the only warm weather gear we brought was our basketball warm-ups from college.
Oh, God.
We literally got new ones. And the coach was like, here, you can use these because you're going to need them. And so they're literally like jumpsuits. And I mean, we look stylish as can be, because we matched and we had our basketball. But then, definitely didn't hold up to those things were not made for the Alaskan wilderness. That's for sure.
Isn't it funny looking back, especially on the early trips and of just like, you don't know, and that's part of the beauty of it too. Is it's like you're not some professional who's like slapped on a bunch of sponsors and all this stuff. Like you're just a kid with a basketball warm up who thought it might be a good idea to see if he could ride his bike from Alaska to Florida.
Dude, everything we had was used or from my dad. We even literally made out of like electric conduit pipe. We made a trailer like with old school bike wheels, and like we welded it and spray painted it. My dad and I built it. That thing fell apart in days out there because it was not like engineered totally. It would have been awesome to have like around campus because it was held together by a piece of pressure washer hose. You know how they can, or no, like a piece of compressed hose like you use for a nail gun or something. How that the male and female parts go together and it locks in. It was so ingenious, all these little things we did, but it was just not made for a 5,500 mile ride across the continent.
That's pretty brutal.
But man, it was wild. We were chased by bison and bears and moose and literally no clue about any of this stuff. Paul did not grow up doing this kind of thing. He just wanted to.
Right.
And so I had at least had some camping experience. And we had people, like I said, we were kind of based in the Orlando area right around there. So we went to local news. We were raising money, too, to build an orphanage that I had been to the summer before in Africa. And so that was kind of the purpose of it and what we were kind of attaching it to as far as a cause. And we went around telling the story to a few places before we left. And I remember these dudes who had done a similar trip with a support vehicle, had done it in 99 days. And they told us, like younger people, probably, mid 30s at the time. And they were like, there's no way y'all can do this. There's no way. They were making fun of us and like just being kind of mean online. That was probably early days of online bullying. This was 2011. Right. So Facebook was in full swing then. And man, it was so funny because we finished in 66 days. And I remember emailing those guys and saying like, so we were averaging like 80 miles a day or so.
Wow.
But that was with no planning, no training. We didn't train at all. Like we just did it because we were in pretty good shape. I was 20 at the time. So it was like we had youth to lean on. Yeah, we played basketball. We weren't saying like, oh, we're good. No, we just said, hey, the trip's long enough that we can kind of let our body get used to it. I will take that back. We did 2 rides beforehand. They were about 40 miles to kind of get an idea, but those were on bikes that we had like laying around campus, literally amazing 50-year-old yard sale bikes that we got for $10. And one of them got stolen that night because we got back to our apartment and left them on the front and people stole them the next day. So
there's a lot to dive into there. And I want to get into it all. So
endless. But that was the very beginning.
Okay.
Yeah, that was the beginning.
What's like a bullet list or if it's evolved since then or things since then as well. And then I want to start diving into some of those stories.
Yeah, man. Everything's kind of tied together. So, like, you know how it is. When you go do an adventure, your next idea is already kind of popping up. It's one leads into the other, and there's all this stuff that may or may not happen that lead to the next experience. So, for instance, we were biking back. We didn't know anything. I mean, when I tell you we didn't know what we were doing, we didn't know We didn't know how to change a flat tire.
Yeah.
And we were naive enough to think that we wouldn't have one. And not an hour into the trip, we have 2 flat tires. And we are on the side of the road for hours in Fairbanks with it snowing on us, by the way, which we clearly didn't prepare for. Within hours, we were figuring out how to change a flat tire using a patch kit. We knew nothing, and things were breaking. We had things zip tied to other things. The first night I used my Camelback, which was a gift, by the way, the little, hydration pack. Yeah. That was an old man heard we were going. He's like, "Hey, I've had this in my closet for like 8 years. You can have it." It's just, he got it as a Christmas present.
Like,
never used it.
This.
And so I had it full of water. I used it as a pillow, and it got down to like 12 degrees that night in May, and it leaked all night long into the bottom of the tent and into my sleeping bag, and then it froze. It was so, and I had a Swiss Sport sleeping bag that I got off Amazon for $22, and it was a piece of trash. Sorry, Swiss Sport. It was literally like having a silky bed sheet as a sleeping bag, and it was miserable, man. Just I cried for the first week. I was just like, "What the hell have we done?" And
you made it.
We did make it, and so I was saying that we didn't know what we were doing. Hey, you've heard of Banff, Alberta, the beautiful area, Jasper. I mean, most people who have been outside of their house have heard of Banff or like the Canadian Rockies.
Sure.
We didn't know those were the thing. We didn't know. Everyone was like, "You got to go to Jasper, do the Icefield Parkway to Banff." And so we're like, all right. So we kind of made sure we did that, and we were absolutely blown away. We get into Banff and right into town on a Thursday night, and we see all these mountain bikes everywhere, like tons of mountain bikes. And they weren't set up like they were riding for the day. They looked like they were touring like us, but on these beefier bikes, because we were on like touring bikes, which are essentially just like steel framed road bikes. And, sure. And I was like, what is all these people doing? And someone finally told us, like, yeah, there's this race starting tomorrow called the Tour Divide. It's a 2,700-mile race from here in Banff, which is 200 miles north of the Canadian border, 250 miles north. And it's a race all the way to Mexico. And it's along the Continental Divide Trail, but the bike version. So it's not exact to the hiking route, but it's very, very close. It's like all the bikeable trails and forest roads, but it's pretty much you're on the Continental Divide all the way there. So it's like 200,000 feet of elevation gain, 2,700 miles. It's burly, and it's 90% off road. What's that?
I said just epic.
Oh, just epic. And I told Paul, I was like, we have to do this in 2 years. And so our next trip together was that trip. 2 years later, we lined up for the Tour Divide and raced to Mexico. And that was insane. That took about a month. And, or 25 days, but I had done another cross-country ride in between then. So honestly, after that Alaska trip, for the next 5 or 6 years, I did a cross-country bike ride adventure, some sort, like epic and big, every year. And that's pretty much until a few years into my marriage, and transitioned it for the podcast. I had a backpacking company for a while where I guided for a long time, guided national park trips, and kind of led to what I do now in a lot of ways. So, but I don't know if I answered your question.
No, yes, absolutely. All of those sound amazing, man. So what were the bike routes? You have the Tour Divide, you had Alaska to Florida. What were some of the other bike routes?
Another one was, funny enough, in between those two, I did a ride up the East Coast of pretty much from my home, or actually from campus. I actually left from campus. School got out, and like the next day I left and went up to essentially the Canadian border along the East Coast. And that was awesome because it was just totally different than out west, which is just huge, beautiful landscapes. I mean, I love that more than anything, but this was so different because, and I don't ever really talk about this East Coast trip. There was so much history. so much culture in the sense of like early American history and culture. I stopped
Right.
at Washington, D.C. and spent like 3 days exploring the Smithsonian museums. I went to all the very important historical sites along the East Coast, Gettysburg and um, what is it? Henry David Thoreau's cabin out at Walden Pond. I went to Emily Dickinson's house. I went to all these American poets and artists and literature, and it was just New York City and Boston. It was amazing. It was absolutely an amazing experience, and it was a totally different pace. But I did that. The next year, I did the Tour Divide, which is, like I said, Canada to Mexico. But after when I got to Mexico, that was only about a third of the trip. I had actually planned, because I had just graduated college then as well. Paul had been out a few years and he was married, had a job. So he was the one with the time restraint. Then I was pretty much open. So what I had planned was once I got to Mexico, I would turn around and do another big loop of the American West and go through 30 national parks. So I would hit literally almost every national park out west that's bikeable I went to. I basically made a beeline from one to the other and spent days, if not a week, at each one, exploring, hiking, camping,
Awesome.
getting to know people. It was that one I don't talk about a lot either, but that was I cannot recommend that enough. And if you have even a few months to do something like that, so I'm talking like the diversity of that trip was Petrified Forest, Grand Canyon.
What were some of your favorite parks from that trip?
Man. You can't, I mean, it's also, I mean, think of in just a few weeks on foot or on your human power, you can go from places like the Grand Canyon to the Redwood Forest, to Joshua Tree, to Yosemite Valley, to Olympic National Park and the rainforest and Mount Rainier, Glacier, Yellowstone, Tetons, Rocky Mountain, Zion, Rice, Jesus. It was
amazing.
in all the places in between that are just stunning, that aren't national parks, but they're absolutely breathtaking. You're pretty much in forest or national forest or state forest the whole time, because a lot of national parks are also surrounded by government land of a different like tier. And so it's amazing camping, amazing diversity of landscapes. And I've gone back to almost all those places since, and I can't really recapture how amazing it was to get there on foot. You know what I mean?
So that was hiking or biking? Biking.
I'm sorry, on like human power. But sure. Everything was just when you do something. That's what's so great about adventure is when you do something with your own power, just like anything you do by your own effort, whether that's an adventure or building a business or, working with your hands in some way, cooking a meal. It's so much more vivid. It's so much more beautiful. I felt like when I was looking around at these landscapes on my bike trips, it's like it's all photoshopped. It's all photoshopped to be a little more saturated, a little more vivid, a little more contrast to where now if I go with way less effort, like I fly somewhere or drive, it's just turned down a notch. You know what I'm saying? It's
100%.
Not as brilliant or breathtaking. It's like, wow, this is still amazing. But there's something about when you do it with your own effort that just makes it so much better.
Yeah, 100%. I understand. There's a famous canoeist, Bill Mason. I don't know if you've ever heard of him, but he's a
good name.
Yeah, great name. He's an old, funny fella, but one of the most famous canoeists in books and movies, old timer Canadian. And I remember the first time something like that clicked with me. I was watching one of his movies, and something along the lines he was describing the getting to know a place in a motorboat versus a canoe. And he was talking about like the Canadian North, filled with lakes and interconnected rivers and such. And he's like, you get to know a place so much more intimately in the canoe or walking or biking than just flying or, flying by in a car or whatever normal speed of transportation, because it's like the world is so much larger when it's human powered, but you can still access it all, and it's more vivid, and it's more it's just more detailed. I think you when you're riding your bike into Yosemite, like you can feel the breeze and the smells of that dry desert sand, and it's neat.
It is so much better because of those things. You're totally right. The smell to me is just, even now, if I get a whiff of sage or redwood or anything like that, tears almost come to my eyes because of the memories and the beauty of just remembering it all. And smell does it for me, but it bleeds into other parts of life too, man. I tell you what, you realize when you do an experience, especially without an engine, because you hear so much more. You hear everything. Everything is, like you just mentioned, so much more vivid that when you get back to normal life, you realize how much is actually around you that you don't maybe notice before. I was just pulling weeds in my yard the other day, and I'm on my hands and knees down looking at the ground, and I'm like, there is so much life down here on the ground. Like there's wars being waged between the ants and the caterpillars and the different plants that are trying to survive. It's an entire world in that little square foot of yard. And that's anywhere you want to be. And so that an adventure is there too. So it's kind of cool how there's always potential to get more out of life right where you are. You don't have to travel to these places to get it. It's right where you are. Yeah. I say that all the time on the podcast, is where you live and where you exist is an amazing, life-changing foreign place to someone else.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And there's lots of stuff that we overlook around us that can be easy to dip into. What are some of the stuff that you like to do around you to get out and kind of have some of those smaller adventures?
Yeah, I'm in the time of smaller adventures in my life right now with kids. Man, so it's like I said, I live on the Gulf Coast of Florida. We moved here during the pandemic from Colorado. We were loving it out there, but just I've compared it like when life was, if you look at your life like a wheel, like all the spokes of a wheel. I just felt like out west, I loved it. That's kind of where we settled after a lot of this big trip. Felt like a few aspects of life were really, really good, like the outdoor experiences and adventure, but other aspects of life were totally missing. Family. Half the year was freezing, and we're Florida people. My wife and I, we did not like the cold. I did not get into skiing. I'm like, no, I like summer sports. I like hiking. I like backpacking and mountain biking, and I'm not into all this snow stuff. I'll figure something out. I got into snowshoeing, but I was not like about the skiing too. Skiing too is expensive. So I'm like, dadgum, I can't spend $500 every time I do this. So now that we're back in Florida and things are so much more balanced, like I was saying before, I love to paddleboard. I try to get out. It's similar to canoeing. I have a canoe too. I actually just bought an old canoe and I'm painting it right now, but it's fiberglass. But I love the water because there's so much happening there. And what I love about paddleboarding that I didn't realize when I was canoeing and kayaking so much is how one of my favorite things about it is looking in the water, like looking down. And there's plenty of pretty clear water around here. And there's a lot of springs too. I love looking down at the fish. I just probably a month ago now, I'm out there in the Gulf. There's a lot of intercoastal water too, and islands and mangrove paths, and I'm not out in the ocean. Like I like to be in the bays and in the lagoons and just kind of like exploring around. It's beautiful. Or up the river. There's tons and tons of rivers around here that are just amazing to paddle. I was looking down and it's probably like 10 feet of water underneath me, and it's pretty clear, a little murky, but pretty blue, clear water. And I'm looking down and I can see tons of stuff swimming below me, like 3 to 4 foot long fish. But I couldn't tell what they were. So I get in a spot where it's way clear and I'm looking, and it is hundreds of sharks.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, holy crap. And stingrays too. There was a lot of stingrays. They were kind of following the skull of mullet, but I got an even clearer look, and every single one of the sharks, every single one of them, like hundreds of them, were hammerheads, which was so crazy looking. Like to see these literally hammerhead shaped creatures swimming around by the hundreds, dozens probably in an area, but over the course of where I paddled, there was hundreds, if that makes sense. So there was a dozen or so underneath me at a time, but and they were just all kind of looking for fish. And they're, like I said, they're not huge, so it didn't feel threatening at all. And they would scatter when I got near them or paddled and disturbed the water. But I love that stuff, man. Yeah. So paddleboarding's a big one. I just took I just took about 15 dudes, all guys, actually. We invite everybody, but it was this trip happened to be all guys. Some friends and I. Actually, my friend Paul lives here now.
Nice.
He moved from Salt Lake City. So we've been trying to get out we try to make a rule every 8 weeks we go do something on either on the water or a bike trip or something, like a 24 to 48 hour experience. And so yeah, man, that's what I'm doing adventure wise now.
That's great. I love it. The hammerheads, that sounds wild, man. Which makes me think, are there any wildlife encounters that come to the forefront from your trips cycling and checking out the parks and the Tour Divide and cycling Alaska to Florida? Like, is there one or two wildlife stories that come to mind?
Yes. Yeah, man, I can't wait. So, all right. So, Florida gets a bad rap in a lot of places, but I will say one thing that's true. There are a lot of critters here. I went for a walk out in the woods. It's not even a hike here, but it was a walk on a trail. It was a hike, but it was flat. Within 20 minutes, I almost stepped on 4 different types of snakes. I'm talking big snakes too. None of them were venomous, thankfully, but I'm like, Dad, gum, there's gators everywhere. It's unreal the amount of things you can just kind of run into on accident. There's iguanas in the trees. It's wild. But so I have there's way more wildlife here than I remember when I used to live here growing up. But on the trip specifically, oh man. So that Alaska trip, let me tell you a quick story.
Please do.
I try to make it quick.
No, take your time.
It's perfect because it has to do with a buffalo or a bison, whatever you want to call it. And we get to British Columbia on the Alaskan trip, and it's our first day in British Columbia, and we cross from the Yukon territory into BC, and there's a huge billboard that says "Watch out for bison," and I'm like, why are there bison? Like it was right when you cross the border too. It was like, welcome to BC, watch out for bison. And I was like, do they know to just stay on this side of the sign? How do you think? But sure enough, we crossed that sign. Well, they were everywhere. I'm talking, it was like we were biking through a cow pasture full of buffalo everywhere you looked. And they were usually pretty skittish. Like they're intimidating creatures. They're like possessed cows. They're hefty, and you look at them and they just, most of the time they would run away or trot away or just stand, stay frozen, never once come towards us or anything like that. But we start going up this climb towards the end of the day. And like I said, it's getting close to end of May at this point, and the days are getting longer, and it's, it's not getting dark till like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. No, probably 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And so it's probably 8 o'clock at this point, maybe a little earlier, but it's dusk, and we see this thing laying on the side of the road up ahead. We're like, what is that? It looked like it could have been a bear, but it was really flat on its side. Well, it was a bison. They're not real wide. They're kind of narrow. So when it was laying down, it just looked weird. It looked different, but it was like a dog rolling around in the grass, but we spooked it because we kind of tried to bike around it. It was right on the side of the road, and we freaked him out. So this bison jumps up and runs away from us on the road, though. It ran into the road and is just trotting on the asphalt, and you could hear its hooves hitting the asphalt, but it's in the other lane. So it's going into traffic over a hill. And we're like, oh, crap. Like there's not a lot of cars out there, but most of them are trucks, like semis. So it could be really nasty if one happens to be coming and they don't see it in time. Well, sure enough, we crest this hill, and there's a semi up there who thankfully had saw him and started slowing down. And this bison is just running straight for that semi.
Holy cow.
Like straight towards it. And then at the last minute, it cuts into our lane on the right side and keeps going straight down the highway. And we start biking past the semi driver, and he yells out the window and he goes, I've never seen anything like that. And he's like, y'all be careful. And I mean, this was in, like 2 seconds. He yells all this, like, never seen anything like that. Y'all be careful. And we keep going. And this bison, we could tell, was like running from us because it kept looking back at us. It kept looking back, like looking over its shoulder and like trotting even faster when it saw we were still coming. Well, it did this for an hour. An hour. It ran ahead of us like 12 miles. It ran in front of us, going from like 50 yards to 10 yards, like pretty close at times, where especially if there was a little downhill, I'm like, we're going to catch this thing. And so we keep going. The road starts to flatten out again, and we slow down, and this thing's just trotting along and kind of goes around a bend where we were going to find it. There was going to be a little town there. It was supposed to be like a rest stop, a pretty major rest stop, where we were going to get some supplies. And the next town wasn't for 50 miles. And we get around the bend and we see the town, and it's completely abandoned. Like it looks like it's out of a movie. The windows are broken. Cars have been set on fire in the past. Like it's all grown up. There's a hotel there that's just graffiti all over. It was so eerie because it was getting close to dark. And I was like, oh crap, man, what are we going to do? Because we're almost out of food. And I had totally forgotten about the bison. I was like, I don't know. So we're like, all right, we've got enough. It's not super dire. We're going to be fine. It just would have been nice to have some extra. And we're like, all right, let's just keep going. This is really weird. We don't know if anybody's there. So we start going, and we've kind of been climbing this whole time. So we're at kind of the crest of this pass. We're going to start going downhill pretty quick. And we're getting close, probably a quarter mile from this downhill. And I'm like, man, where's that bison at? Like, what happened to him? And no joke, come flying out of that gas station area and out of that hotel comes this bison, like in a dead sprint behind us. And it gets right back into the road, keeps chasing us. And we're screaming because it is coming right for us. And we're standing on the pedals, flying and just huffing and puffing, trying to get to where it starts going downhill. This thing gets within 10 yards of us, horns down. I mean, it just about caught us. And we get going, and it's kind of serpentines down the mountain. So we finally get to the bottom. It's like a mile down to the bottom of this very short pass. And we're like, all right, let's get off the bikes. Let's jump off into the woods and hide and let this thing run past us or something. We don't know where it is. But as soon as we got off the bikes, we look behind us, and here it comes around the bend.
Jeez.
The only problem was we're at the bottom of this valley. Now we got to climb back up again for probably another half mile, we could tell, before it levels back out. So we had to make the decision, like, do we bail and hide? It clearly sees us. Like, it's not that far away. Or do we just keep going? So we were like, we got to keep going. So we jump back on the bikes, just cranking our way up this hill. And it's gaining on us constantly.
Oh,
and I'm like, we're getting to the point we need to decide if we're going to bail and like get on the railing, because one side was a big drop off. Like we're going to just kind of hang out on this super steep ledge and thinking if it tries to jump over, it'll kind of tumble down the hill. There's no way it could have that traction. That was like, we were getting ready to jump off, and then it just stops. It just stops right in the road within 15 yards of us and just walks like the pace we're going. And we crest the hill. We didn't take any chances. We crest the hill and we look up ahead. It's probably a flat mile before it goes up even more. And we could see bison all over the road ahead of us. And we're like, there's no freaking way. We bailed. We went right into the woods. We pushed around. Like we pushed our bikes through these trees. It was so thick. And we lean them against a tree. We wait for like 15 minutes just in silence. And, you know, it's that eerie silence. There's mosquitoes in the air. It's like, oh, gosh. All right, I don't hear this thing. You would hear this thing. You know, it's enormous. And these woods are so thick. So we start looking for a spot to put our tent down. And we got to walk like 15 yards from our bikes to find somewhere that was big enough to lay our little tent down. We find a spot. We walk back to the bikes. And I'll never forget, Paul turned around to walk to the tent before me, and he goes, holy mackerel. And I was like, what? I was like, usually I'm like, oh, he literally said holy mackerel. And I was like, who says holy mackerel? And I was thinking, I turned around, I kid you not, Will, there was that bison standing right next to our tent, right next to it,
into the woods,
followed us into the woods. And we knew it was the same one, because when it was running, after about 20 minutes of it running, its tongue was hanging out because it was exhausted. Its tongue was hanging out this whole time. And when we turned around, this thing had the longest freaking tongue hanging out. It was breathing like it had just ran a marathon, and it was just dead staring at us. And Paul was frozen. I was frozen. I started looking like, okay, what tree am I going to get behind if it charges? Because this is, 20 feet from us. I have no idea how it snuck up on us, but it was right there next to our tent. And I didn't say anything. We just stood there for 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then it just sprinted kind of perpendicular to us straight through the woods, just till it was out of earshot.
Just beelined it.
Beelines through the woods. Where it was going, I have no idea. And we were just like, oh my God.
Wow.
And we definitely did not sleep well that night, because we were like, this thing's going to come back and just trample us.
Trailed by a buffalo.
Yeah, we were freaked out
roamer.
for a few days. Buffalo roamer, man. So that's my buffalo story.
That's funny. How about, is there a moment or a story that kind of encompasses the spirit of all of these trips? I know that's kind of a broad question, but do you kind of get what I'm asking?
Oh man, yeah, that's a big one. I tell you what, the most meaningful moments on these experiences are not usually those big stories like that. It is the small things. It's the stuff that's like makes you appreciate life, makes you thankful for. It's not the extreme. I don't like the extreme that much. Like, it's great to have those stories, but I don't go looking for them. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, I'm not going to turn away a story, but I'm out there to have a good time and to learn things. But gosh, a story that encapsulates like the spirit of adventure. I'd say the buffalo is definitely one of them.
Is there any how about, obviously the people always make these journeys as well. I'm sure you ran into some interesting folk along the way. Any story like that revived your faith in humanity or anything along those lines?
I tell you what, there's one story that's still, there's so many with people from you go out on an adventure. Yeah, I know through hikers talk about it a lot with trail magic, but anyone on an adventure, you're going to be blown away by the generosity of people and just the kindness of people taking you into their life and their lifestyle for the day or week or whatever, however long you're with them. It's amazing. And when I think about it now, I'm like, wow, what would it take for me to accept someone like me who is traveling to do the things that some people have done for me? You know what I mean?
It's a high bar.
Take the day. They'll take the day off work just to show you around their town and drive you to cool things. And I thought nothing of it at the time, but now it's like, wow, they were in my position then with kids and a job and stuff, responsibilities. And I'm like, how did they do that? That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I'm blown away the longer I live and think about those things. But there was one, I was biking near Hilton Head, South Carolina, or no, Beaufort, South Carolina, I think. And this guy was out on a bike ride with a group. Oh, no, he was at a gas station. He was getting ready to go on a bike ride, like a group ride, like an evening ride on like a Thursday night or something. I was biking up the East Coast. I stopped at a gas station to get like some Gatorade or something. And the dude's like, hey, where are you going? And I was like, hey, I'm going all the way up the East Coast. I was still raising money for that orphanage at the time. And I was actually planning to finish the bike trip and then go to Africa to help build that orphanage. And that's what we did. That's what I did. And Paul actually went to Africa with me. He was not able to go on the bike trip. I was by myself. So I'm there. And the dude's like, this is really cool. I'd love to hear more. He's like, I'm going to be home in like an hour and a half after my ride. I got to go home. I got to get my bike. It's like 5 miles from here. But I'm going to go for a bike ride at the local shop. My wife won't be home for a few hours. Here, why don't you go to my house and hang out, get cleaned up, get some food, whatever you want to do, and I'll be home in a little while. He pulls out the key to his house and gives it to me. And he goes, I live here. There's 2 big dogs, like 2 big labs. Don't worry, they're super kind. They won't bother you. And here's the gate code and all that. And I'm like, all right, this is weird. But I got the right feeling from him, And I get to the house and it's on the coast. Like it's this beautiful house on intercoastal waters, like really freaking nice place. And this guy just gave me the key. I walk into the house, I disarm the alarm like he told me, and the dogs come up to me and I'm just like chilling at his house. And then no joke, an hour later he's there and he's like, hey, I picked up some steaks on the way home. We're going to grill out. And we stayed up till like 1 a.m. talking and telling stories. They were huge cycling fans. And the next morning they had breakfast ready and he went off to work and so did his wife. And I was just blown away. They let me leave the house on my own. And it was just one of those moments that you're like, no matter where you are, what you do, there are people like this in the worst war-torn areas. No matter where you are in the world, somebody has got your back. You just really kind of have to believe it. You know what I mean? You got to know that they're out there.
Absolutely.
And that was just another thing where it's like rich or poor, well off or not, someone will be able to help you in a time of need, no matter what.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of a story. I had that happen, dozens of times, more than that, across numerous trips, and so many amazing people that it can be hard to single out the story because you're like, but also this person was great and this stop was amazing. But one that comes to mind to me was kind of a similar one. My cousin's husband's work partner had a duck hunting club on the Mississippi. And so when I was paddling the Mississippi through, he got in contact with me and he's like, yeah, like check out, it was his, like I said, his business partner. And he's like, check out his place. He's not there, but there's like a groundskeeper there. He'll put you up and take care of you. And that was kind of all the discussion. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I thought it would just be a normal, normal, typical place. And I pull up and it's just this amazing hunting club, private hunting club, and they treated me just so well. The groundskeeper picked me up and dropped me off at the river, like brought me brats and like all this stuff. And it was the same type of thing. The guy was out of town for the weekend, so he's like, yeah, the place is yours, man. So I'm like, lounging, watching TV. The World Series was on, so I was watching that, and like a cold beer and a brat, sitting in this amazing duck club. And then the next day, the owner came and gave me like a full tour of the club, and we shot some clays, and yeah, and then I just went off on my way, and it just an awesome experience. Kind of reminded me of that.
Wow. Cold beer, brats, hunting club, watching baseball sounds awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It
Like,
wasn't too bad. It wasn't too bad.
oh man,
How-
it is cool, man. It is cool.
How about some of the guests on your podcast? You've been doing this for, what'd you say, over 3 years now? And in addition to that, the podcast was rolling with the crew before you officially hopped on
Yeah.
board as well. Man, that's a lot of people, a lot of adventures, so many amazing stories. Again, people go listen to the Adventure Sports podcast after this episode and make sure you subscribe and follow. But what are some of the more memorable ones that stick out to you for whatever reason? Obviously, everyone's going to have different adventures and things that speak to them or call to them. But what are a couple of the ones that stick in the forefront of your mind after years of doing this?
Man, you're right. There have been so many. We're up to like 800 and something episodes.
It's crazy.
And I've got, a dozen or so I've already recorded, yours being one of them, that have yet to come out. And man, there's so many that you've forgotten. You've forgotten that you've had these stories, and I'll go back and listen. I'm like, I forgot I even talked to this person.
Yeah,
I don't even know what this story is about. And it's kind of cool too, because you're like, you get to rediscover it in a way. That's not great to like not have a great memory. I'd rather have a really good memory than forget things.
No, I know what you mean. Oftentimes when I'm doing the podcast, I'll go back because you're just so in the moment. And oftentimes as the interviewer as well, you never want to be, but sometimes I'm not paying as much attention as I should be because I'm worried about what the next question is, or like,
Totally.
how I want to steer it next. So when you go back and listen to it, even me, when I go back and listen to like the podcast that I posted, versus just actually having the conversation, like I do come away with it in a different light. It's like, oh, I forgot we mentioned that, or oh, that was funny.
Oh,
Didn't
totally.
even catch that he
Forgot
said
I
that.
said that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say some of the most memorable, or I probably have some recency bias here, but I love this story by Sophie Matterson. I just had her on again recently. She walked across Australia with feral camels.
Whoa. 5
feral camels. And I didn't know this, but there are estimated to be 1 million wild camels, or they call it feral, wild camels in the Australian outback. And that's as many camels in Australia as there are elk in North America.
Holy
to
cow.
give you kind of an idea of population. It's enormous. It's a huge amount of animals, and they're enormous animals. And so she was kind of a news reporter journalist, and she kind of did some stories on camels, fell in love with it, left her job, kind of got into the camel, industry, farming and care, and decided to walk coast to coast in Australia. If you don't know, it's eerily similar to the size of the lower 48 of the US. It's almost identical to like distance coast to coast. So if someone says they did a coast to coast bike ride of Australia, it's about the same thing as like
it's deceivingly big.
No, it's huge. And it's 1/12 of the population of the US. So to give you a scale of how isolated and desolate it is and how little services there actually are in some of these places. And she's not on roads either. She's like walking across the outback, like out, like off a trail. It's unreal.
And so she's got a gun. And so she's got like a pack of broken or stray camels that are like that she's rolling with.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the right term to break a camel.
I don't either. I don't know. I know.
Sounds okay, but
it's so funny because it's like, we think of breaking a horse as this amazing, hardcore, elegant experience of like horse are, wild horses are beautiful and, it's stunning and they're just they're gorgeous animals, and I just think of breaking a camel as being this incredibly ungraceful experience.
Yeah, it doesn't
of just
sound.
this
You're right.
horribly ugly animal. I know Sophie would not like hearing me say that, but she did this, and it took her like 6 months, and so we
Wow.
talked to her halfway through the experience, and then she finished, and that was amazing. It was just such a cool story. And then I've talked to one of the coolest aspects is I've gotten to talk to my heroes. If you're big in the adventure world, you're probably not like an unattainable household name like LeBron James.
Right.
If you're famous in this world, you're still probably
You're probably
like
just
scraping
somebody's
by.
pool boy.
Exactly. You're still kind of like, you're going to take any opportunity you can, unless you're like Alex Honnold or something. But even then, I get to talk to almost anyone I want to. But one of my favorite episodes, it probably is my favorite episode. I actually didn't host it. Kurt hosted it. And it was about a college student who got in a huge trouble at school, got kicked out for being drunk on campus, like had a huge problem with alcohol, and wanted to do something to turn his life around, and decided to buy a moped, literally a moped, and drive it from Boulder, Colorado. Actually, CU Boulder.
There you
So
go.
you might have known him. Robert Sheeran, I think his name was. I don't know. Maybe I'm mixing it up. But he said he's like, I just got my life together, and I wanted to do something to kind of make this transition permanent. And he was so self-aware about the whole thing. It was like comical. And he drove the moped to Alaska was the experience. So essentially what I did, just on a moped going 20 miles an hour. And the way it was obviously not the most extreme experience. We've had, people do the 7 summits on the show. Like people have done hardcore things on the show or talked about them. This was by far not even close to the hardest, but the way he told the story, the experiences, the encounters, I'm like, dude, this is the best story I've ever heard. Like, I absolutely love it. The humor, just the strangeness of it.
It's great.
That's probably my favorite episode, and it's one of the more unassuming. So I love talking to people that you don't know where the conversation is going to go, and you don't know the story yet. And so I do a lot of research on people, but I do like to know. I do like it when not everything's been poured out on the internet. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, when you dig a little bit to find something, and it kind of just stumble upon a story.
Because it takes it in a totally new direction. But yeah, there's been so many. But anything that's a little different. From sailing around the world.
Yeah, what are some of the different ones? Like I talked with a guy who has a movie on Netflix who maybe you want to talk to as well. He skateboarded from Chicago to New York. I thought that one. Stuff. I thought that one was cool. It was different, What are some of those that come to mind for you?
So that's a great example of one. I love that. I did talk to a guy that once. He rollerbladed like New Mexico to California. He was awesome.
Sounds like terrible back pain.
Dude, I know. He was like backpacking on rollerblades, literally like same setup. I mean, this dude was one of the coolest people I've ever talked to.
That's awesome.
And so stuff like that. We get a lot of thru hikers. We get a lot of tradition. So there's definitely major buckets things fall into, but some of my favorite are the people who walk. We've got one guy, Tom Tursich, that we've had on like 3 times over the last 7 years. He's walking around the world with his dog that he literally found on the side of the road, who's been with him for the last 7 years. And so that's going to be the first dog to like walk around the world, quote, funny. Walk around the world. And he's gone like across every continent. He's from New Jersey, and he's going to finish probably in the fall sometime, maybe this summer. And so I've talked to him like 3 times. I kind of want to like be there when he finishes it. I'm like, he's walked around the world. The least I can do is, fly up there it's like an hour and a half, 2-hour flight. This is not that long. So
absolutely. That'd be cool.
I would love to. So I love walking, folks. I love anyone doing something a little different. One of my other favorites was Jerome Rand, who solo sailed around the world for 10 months. Never stopped, never resupplied, never saw anybody, maybe saw land twice.
Never stopped?
Never stopped. He would sleep in his cabin and sail. Like it's be full blown going, which is kind of weird apparently in the sailing world. Not like you got to be pretty confident to do that because you could just run into stuff. But he's like, the chances of me running into something that aren't on my radar or whatever they call it
Right.
is so slim. I'm like, yeah, but
That's
shipping
insane.
container or something.
And
so he had a stat that has never left me. He goes, there were many nights where when I was in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, I knew for a fact the closest human beings to me were in the International Space Station above me, flying overhead. He goes, they're like 120 miles away, and the closest human on Earth was like 250 miles away. He goes, the closest people to me were in space. There were many nights where that was a realization. I'm like, that is insane.
That is insane.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy to think that to put that relative, I guess it's not the moon. The International Space Station is a lot closer than the moon. But to put that, in perspective, it makes it seem like, maybe the International Space Station isn't that far.
It's really not. It's like here to Orlando for me, just up.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, that's a wild one. The sailing stuff always fascinates me as somebody who's from the Midwest and loves the outdoors, but hasn't really had the chance to like explore the ocean as much as I'd love to. That stuff is just so gnarly. Some of the sailing, solo sailing, and like the Antarctic and Arctic rowing and sailing expeditions, like that stuff is so gnarly.
That's and I think he's only like the 7th person in the world to do it, solo sail around the world. And he did an even gnarlier trip last year. He was trying to do it not kind of around the equator, but pole to pole. So basically figure 8 the world. So go around the North Passage through the North Passage over the North Pole, and then basically encircle Antarctica and go back, starting from Massachusetts is where he's from. So that would have been a world's first, but he got stopped because of COVID, actually. I was like, you're going to catch COVID on the North Pole? He's like, no, it was like there's no, like search and rescue couldn't come for him.
Right.
And so that is what kind of stopped him. But my other favorite styles are anyone who does an experience on a really, really, really tight budget. So I'm blown away by the people who spend, hundreds of dollars or 1,000 on something. So for perspective, my first Alaska trip, literally not that extreme, like fairly, a college budget,
sure,
but not not neglectful to my body. Probably. I mean, we ate a lot of trash on that trip, but we could have spent the same money on higher quality food. I did that whole experience, plane ticket included, for $1,000.
Oh, wow.
And that was 66 days of travel, $400 one-way ticket. I did have the bike given to me. That was a big expense. But even now, I'm like, the normal cost of life,
seriously,
I could come up with $1,000 to do an experience. $1,000 for something so life-changing and pivotal that I'm talking about 12 years later, 10 years later, it was way worth it. I'd spend
Absolutely.
that now in a heartbeat to do that. And so we had one guy recently, this college guy, he biked across America on a $19 bike he got from Goodwill. And I just love that, because one of the things we talk about on ASP is like, adventure is probably the cheapest hobby you're ever going to have if you're going after adventure. If you're going after stuff and having the stuff you need to do adventure, you're going to spend a fortune. But I can't tell you, living in Colorado, it just used to blow my mind. Like, you don't need a $75,000 van to go camping. You don't. You need a tent from Walmart for $25. You need a yard sale, like everything. Yep. You don't need a $400 tent, for instance. Now, there is a point. You're doing experience. You're doing a canoe of the Yukon. You need a quality craft. there's certain things you on a budget. When I go and do these things for my friends every 8 weeks, I think the only money we spend is the gas to get there. We just grab stuff out of our pantry, leftovers out of the fridge, a couple, granola bars and some Snickers. Shoot, if it depended on the trip, some SpaghettiOs, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like gas to get there. Maybe a campsite rental that's like primitive for $8. And it's like we have the equipment, everything's used. It's the cheapest thing I do. And it's, I can find $50 every 8 weeks to go have this incredible experience. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head.
And I think you're similar from what I've seen.
Absolutely. And
just looking at your pictures, I'm like, it's not a bunch of like Instagram worthy stuff. It's just the stuff you need to get it done.
Absolutely.
And have a good time.
It's all about getting out there and doing it. And yeah, that's one of my general takeaways too. When I just did a speech at Canoecopia, which is the world's largest paddle sport convention, and one of my lessons from my trips, and one of them is, like you don't need all this stuff. I guess the general lesson is what is it? Now I'm forgetting it. There's a author, Audrey Sutherland, who wrote Paddling the North. Her quote is go light, go slow, go now. And it's like you don't need all this stuff, She paddled the Inside Passage in a solo in an inflatable kayak, I think in like the 70s. And
wow.
Basically her thing was the same thing that you were saying about your Alaskan trip. It's like, when you first went, you didn't know what you were doing. She didn't know what she was doing. When I first started on my Mississippi trip, I had like a cast iron pan. I had, Dutch oven, a cutting board, a guitar, like all kinds of ridiculous stuff. And, but you learn as you go. And then I think too, that there is like a learning curve where at the beginning, you think that you might need all of that stuff because you see everybody with the fancy tent and the fancy rain jacket and all that stuff. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe I do. And then I think that as you get into it more, you realize that you need less and less of that stuff. It's just about going out and getting, just doing it rather than having everything exactly perfect, Hey, Mason.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yep, I got you. But yeah, hey, I think we'll put a wrap on it, man. I really enjoyed talking with you, and we'll have to stay in touch. And best of luck with the Adventure Sports podcast, and thanks for sharing a little bit of your story, man.
No, this was awesome. I appreciate you having me on, and I've seen a lot of guests on your show. It's like, dang, I got to talk to them. That sounds awesome.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
and if you ever see anybody that's been a guest on ours, man, let me know. I'd love to make the intro. And to me, man, just having the conversations is so much fun. It's invigorating, and it helps you get through the grind of life.
And there you have it, episode 44 of Buffalo Roamer Outdoors with Mason Gravley. Again, he is the host of the Adventure Sports Podcast. Go like and subscribe that podcast. You can get all kinds of new stories of adventure there. Another good show. He also hosts Without Compromise. And if you like the Buffalo Roamer Outdoors podcast, please leave a review and a rating for us on Spotify or iTunes. All right, go get outside, get some fresh air. Hopefully I'll catch you out on the river, out hiking around somewhere sometime soon.